Yeah, I think tell them.
Oh, yeah.
I'm coming out of here. It's not bad.
Morning, Bob. How are you?
Can you hear us, Bob? No.
You heard us before, didn't you?
Yeah. Hey, Bob, can you hear us? No. Not on mute, is he?
No, I don't think he is.
It was working like 2 minutes ago. You know the red lights right now, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Bob, can you hear us?
Yes.
Give him a message, yeah.
Yes.
Good answer. Yeah.
You can read. You can read. I still don't think it's loud enough, but
Yeah, I think so too.
yeah.
We'll see how it goes anyways.
Yeah.
Wow. Morena. Taka te ho ke te uru, whakataka te ho ke te tonga, ke makina kina, ke uta, ke mataratara, ke tai, e hi ake ane te atakura, he teo, he huka, he hohu, te he moriora. Let us affirm today that we as councillors will work together to serve the citizens of Selwyn District, to always use our gifts of understanding, courage, common sense, wisdom and integrity in all our discussions, dealings and decisions so that we may solve problems effectively. May we always recognise each other's values and opinions, be fair-minded and ready to listen to each other's point of view. In our dealings with each other, let us always be open to the truth of others and ready to seek agreement, slow to take offence and always prepared to forgive. May we always work to enhance the well-being of Selwyn District and its communities. Right, good morning. Any apologies?
We have an apology, Madam Chair, from Mayor Broughton.
Oh, just witness. Any extraordinary business?
Oh, okay. I sent out an email about tuition that I want to discuss and excluded. So just want to keep an eye that they will be.
Yeah.
And Alicia, I had one, there's period conversation yesterday.
One or two?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Mara, yours is PX as well?
Yeah.
Conflicts of interest?
Nothing that has been brought to my attention, Madam Chair.
Which brings us on to the minutes. Could I please have someone move that the minutes of the last hui are in full and complete accurate record? Thank you, Murray and Jane. Thank you. All in favour?
Sorry. I, Jenny. You can tell we're used to the cheers.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Bob.
Gotta shout at us, Bob. No, he's on mute.
I'm fine, thanks. Okay.
Oh, it's not really loud.
Bob, can you hear us okay?
Yes,
Can you check your volume because we can only just hear you?
it's on. It's right up at 100%. It's as high as it'll go.
Get that? Did anybody get that? Thanks.
Well, you
Just
know,
gonna speak louder.
where's it at from? We can turn it up to there.
Right. Yes, I took this report.
Say you all again in person. A few of you say it's been a very long time since we.
Yeah. Talk me through those minutes.
It was only a month skip, wasn't it? So a couple of things from me. Firstly, thank you to Cord for our health and safety site visit. I think maybe 2 weeks ago, and the pouring down of rain. So great effort by full council to attend that. And but I want to, Acordo obviously with us later in our hui, but and I will reiterate again there. But what impressed me most about that site visit was setting a very good standard on baseline health and safety induction. So you'll notice that as soon as we attended, before we went onto site, and we were actually outside the kind of on-site, I guess, working offices, we had a very thorough health and safety induction. We discussed what critical risks were before we went on site. So I think that sets a really good baseline for all of our health and safety visits going forward. So that was great, and it was good that we were able to actually see the workers on site and see what they were doing, and be able to see those health and safety risks, I guess, in real time, and so, especially with the weather conditions, and being able to see what the workers are going through. You know, it's very easy for us to stand on the sideline with them, maybe some umbrellas for 5 minutes, but obviously those workers are there all day, so it's great. The second thing was that, as most of you are aware, OAG sent out, I think it's bi-monthly, a very good kind of, it's almost L&D learning update for local government chairs, but actually anyone is available to listen into their sessions, and they are very, very good topics. I actually get a lot out of them. The last one, which was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago now, was actually around anti-bullying in the workplace. And what I got out most of that, and I do highly recommend that you tap into any of OAG's resources. You know, they're not long sessions, and the Q&A bit at the end is really good. But the anti-bullying one was actually around, you know, these very important topics, discussions within the workplace. That it's very easy to say, oh, that's you know, P&C, or that's HR's department. So any kind of, I guess, you know, complaint or issue that's dealt with HR, again with health and safety or other issues. And actually, you know what, to change culture in an organisation, those really important, not topics, but I guess areas to create good culture are not actually the health and safety. It's not the health and safety or HR's role. It's actually chief executive and the governance role to change culture, you know, that tone from the top. So yeah, highly recommend those sessions. They come to me. I think they come to you, Deborah. I'm not sure. Yeah. So, but feel I would say absolutely dial into them. I find them really beneficial. So get a lot out of them.
And Sorry.
They also have a magazine that comes out with the written programs in them as well, which are very, very helpful.
Let's call from me. Someone move it.
I'll move it. You'll second it. Thank you. And a favour. I'm a bit rusty, 1 month off. And no, I know you're very helpful. Thank you. Keep. Yeah. Right. Manager's report.
So, Madam Chair, I will introduce this. Good morning, everybody, and then hand to Kelvin to talk to items 2 and 3. But I just want to reiterate your comments about the site visit. And we met with Cord CE and Chair this morning and asked that specific thanks be passed on, to his staff who helped with that event. But secondly, I think the induction, that really did set the bar. And I thought that the staff member who was in charge of that did a spectacular job. So I just thank you very much for your attendance. One of the other things that the chair and I work to try and do is to get site visits as a regular thing. Obviously, middle of winter, we don't do that. But any site visits that anyone particularly would like to show some interest in, please let us know, bearing in mind that we have changed the audit and risk calendar so that effectively we've got the full day now for audit and risk. We're not just squeezing it in to an hour prior to a meeting. So just coordinate with that. Kelvin, I'll pass to you for items 2 and 3.
Good morning, everyone. So item 2 on the manager's report is the update to the annual report audit. There's been a small change, well, a few changes that have occurred since writing this. So Julian Tan from Audit New Zealand got a hold of me yesterday to discuss dates, which was interesting because his manager was unaware of these dates at the time, but it's gone back to central area to plan, to the resourcing group. Julian had no indication of what a new date may be, whether it's brought forward or pushed back, but his only commitment was that they would meet the deadline of 31 December. Likely that the interim audit work will combine as it did last year with the final audit work, and he anticipates there'll be a audit plan with us in the next couple of weeks. Any questions on that matter before we move to the next one?
Sorry, I'm not Jeff, by the way, I'm Deborah. Just with regards to that particular time frame, does that make it difficult for staff to meet compliance, or do you just have to find a way of working around it?
Oh, well, it does provide staff a little bit more time to do things with that timeline coming out. But what it does do is you take your eye off the ball for that period of time where you'd like to actually close it out a lot quicker. So, yeah, it's sort of a different pressure on staff that occurs, but it's not ideal. What I have heard from wider discussions with OAG is, our Office of the Auditor General, is they're looking to clear the backlog in these financial year audits and then be back up to date. But that is really, really reliant on audit staff being found from around the globe, and it still continues to be an issue within New Zealand. CCTV policy, this was a question raised in the March meeting around their policy. Policy, which is operational, covers the installation and use of our council-owned CCTV equipment. It doesn't involve anything that's owned by the community. The purpose of it is really to enhance the safety and security of our staff, visitors, selected members, ensure the protection of our equipment, a deterrence around antisocial behaviour, and enables investigation of antisocial behaviour where New Zealand Police are involved. And the policy covers off how we store and handle those recordings and where we would release a recording if necessary.
Murray?
Yeah, thanks, Kelvin. Just with that last item, and look, apologies if it is covered in there. I've had a good look and I can't see it, but the complaints process with other items like this, if the complaint is actually made against the privacy officer, what is our backup? What's our default position there? We haven't got anything.
It'll be the same as it would be with a complaint of wrongdoing or anything like that. It would go up to the mayor or the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee as the mayor as employer of the chief executive.
Yep.
Chief executive being the privacy officer.
So do we, for consistency, do we need to perhaps put that in there? What do you think? It's just a given because that's the procedure for any other issue?
Yes, I think the way we would cover that off, and we're reviewing that, the whistleblower policy right at this minute, and that clearly covers it off with
Yep. Yep. Thank you.
Bob, I can see your hand up.
Yes, just a question. When you said it includes community, what did you actually mean by that?
It excludes community owned. So if a shop owner or a community group decided to install CCTV cameras, that doesn't fall within this policy. These are council owned equipment.
Okay, thank you.
Seat, Shane, are you seat 1?
No, it's me. I'm actually sitting in Jeff's seat, so.
That's it.
So I'm coming up just in case. I'm coming up as Jeff B, so that might help. I'll swap over. Thank you. Right. Now Shane's come up.
Oh, no, you go, Deborah.
Just following on from what Bob's just said, when you've got an F, you've got a mention of crime prevention cameras operating at all times in this area. Is that specifically for community patrols that have those signs, or is that supposed to be a generic sign that will be rolled out across the district?
Yeah, where we've got CCTV cameras in public areas, there'll be a signage to say that there's CCTV cameras operating, just so that people are aware of that for privacy reasons. The intent of their cameras is to certainly not point them in a direction which would encroach on anyone's privacy, but be there to capture anything that relates to the asset itself.
Jane?
Thank you. Thank you, Anissa. Thanks very much, Kelvin. The policy is very robust, and I just wanted to thank you very much for pushing this, getting this through today. It's really just a comment, and it was around training of staff, and I see that's well covered in here. Appropriateness of viewing and recording of the documents, but also the disposal after 30-day period. So obviously some of the questions from public around just the use and storage or security of the footage, and that's well covered in the policy. Approximately 30 days will be disposed of, and all staff are given the appropriate approvals and training to view and record these. Just one question around, I guess, other councils or other organisations that do have a policy like this. I guess it is in line as it has here with the New Zealand Police and other statutory authorities. They're quite a similar policy.
We haven't reviewed a New Zealand Police policy on that, but this is fairly stock standard policy around these things.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Shane. I just have one question. I've recently reviewed a policy for another public entity, and it was just whether we need to make reference to the Privacy Act guidelines on the request from a public member, because the guidelines are, I know we've got a comment in there that says if we would get a request from the public, then it just goes straight to the police, but there are actually quite good guidelines on what's the title of it's the privacy, CCTV manager. So I guess, is that going to be our approach, that if a member from public requests the information, we'll just send it straight to the police? Or should we, my comment being, should we actually follow the guidelines per the Privacy Act, which actually outlines the steps of what you consider what you can release and what you can't? So you don't automatically have to send it to police. If your staff do have the skills and the training and follow those guidelines, they can actually decide what to, whether it's safe to release.
We're very few things will get released to the public. The policy does refer to the privacy principles throughout it, and I think how you would apply those, then you'd go to the guidelines. The policy doesn't necessarily need to direct you to the guidelines within that. There'd be the guidelines of how we deal with it. If someone came to us and said, we believe there's a crime occurred and we need to have a look at we will not react to that. It'll be, you need to go and speak to the police.
That's only in relation if it relates to, so if I came to you and said, I want the CCTV footage on myself as an individual, on my person, because of something that's happened to me, as long as you can safely release it, and there's, when you look at it, or your CCTV manager looks at it, and there's nobody else that's in that footage, then you're able to release that to that individual. So it was whether, and it might just be a comment, a line that goes in there that says we'll follow the, the Privacy Act guidelines when it comes to releasing to public.
Well, no, it refers to the principles continually in there in the policy around the principles of the 13 principles of the privacy. I think the guidelines are what you would do to apply those. So we're following the principles. The guidelines are how you follow the principles. So I think it's the principles which matter in a policy.
Okay, so I guess in answering my question, if I'm an individual coming to you asking for CCTV footage that's on myself, are you automatically going to refer me to the police, or will you have will your person have the...
There's nothing in the policy that would say we would refer you to the police. Anyway.
Not refer to the police, but are you going to be able to release that footage to me if I request it?
As long as it's within the privacy guidelines.
Right. Perfect. Yeah, that's my question.
Privacy principles.
Okay, no, great, thank you.
Yeah, just on sound, I noticed in a couple of places it said there'll be no sound. Is there any instances you can use sound, or is that a government stipulation or what? So that if we needed sound, we couldn't use it?
There's circumstances where we can put in temporary CCTV where we were investigating a matter which needed temporary cameras. As long as we're within the privacy principles, that would be fine, but we'd need to agree that and state that and record why we're doing that. But all our cameras we're not recording sound on those just for privacy reasons, so you don't want to be overhearing a conversation.
Yeah.
Which goes to even recording of into the call centre will be a notice to say that this may be recorded for training purposes, I think will be the general statement.
Yep.
Thank you. No other questions? Can I please have someone move the manager's report? Thank you, Shane, and a seconder. Bob, thank you. All those in favour? Back to you, Calvin. Finance report.
Okay, the finance report table here. This has been through the wider council, but just practice to bring it back here. It's relating to the April period. Key points to focus on here is the net surplus before depreciation and amortisation on page 22, 23 27.2 million above the plan. The positive variances are largely being driven by growth-related activity, predominantly development contributions, but we'll cover the income sources shortly, and partially offset by some increased costs, mainly in relation to what has not been subsidised in flood repairs and increased cost around our Five Waters maintenance contract. Capital expenditure 27.8 lower than plan, and we'll touch on that shortly. Pleasingly, our regulatory space and around building consents, while the year-to-date number is still very low, the month-to-date has seen an uplift from previous periods, and we're seeing that trend continuing. We're still receiving a high volume of consents, but we're getting through them much quicker, which is pleasing. Facilities starting to trend up as you expect, now that the impacts of COVID have started to wear off, but we still have some way to go in terms of coming back on some of those numbers given the impact around August. Our service contract levels are all within the expected levels. Moving through to page 24, and we're looking at, what is 24? Income, as said previously, growth-related income in terms of development contributions are ahead of plan. We do take a conservative approach around the planning for that revenue and a conservative approach around the capex on that side of it. So we're on the right end there. Subsidies and grants higher than planned. Two things that are driving those is the flood funding we received from NZTA and the government grant around the Darfield Defiance Pipeline. Fees and charges also higher than planned, and that largely in the regulatory space, and there's relation to increased volumes, and therefore we're charging more for those consenting. More revenue, not charging more. There's more revenue coming in. Operating expenditure. Year to date, we're close to 10 million above budget. Four key drivers to that: the flood costs, so $6 million relating to that. 3.7 of that has been recovered through subsidies from NZTA. The impact of the maintenance budget for Five Waters, we set that budget prior to the contract being completed for negotiation, so that's going to be a couple of million higher for the year. Refuse charges or dumping or disposal fees are up higher. This is driven largely from the season we had around summer where it was wet and hot, which enabled a lot of growing in people's gardens, therefore the green waste was higher. And there's a little bit of offset on the other side of that around increased revenue, but not a lot. Professional fees are higher than planned, and that was partially offset by the increased revenue, which we talked about, resource consenting. If we move through to page 26 and looking at the surplus or deficit before depreciation, amortisation and tax, a large positive variance in community services and facilities, and that relates to Anzac Lane lots being sold and a couple of parcels of land in iZone. They will be reallocated into a more centrally held unit at some point in the future. Transport reflects the increased the cost, which was unexpected around flooding, net of what we received from NZTA. Moving forward to page 28, capital expenditure, as said, 27.82, below what we'd anticipate to be spending. There'll be approximately 40 million carried forward into the budget for next year, which will go to next council meeting on the 22nd for adoption of that plan. Balance sheet, not much to report there, and we'll come to a treasury report shortly, which will cover off most of the material items there. Council investments, likewise, there's very little movement there. Performance measures, still the same trend as previously around the impact of COVID had on community centres and halls and the bookings. That is just probably a permanent gap we're going to have to face, and as discussed with the council last meeting, when we discussed finances, there's a program of marketing out to increase the use of our halls, which Denise's team's leading. Otherwise, the other red there is looking at the building consent issued within statutory timeframes, and as I said, that's trending up, but still a worrying number. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Calvin. Murray?
Yeah, thanks, Kelvin. And just for clarity, Councillor Miller and I caught up with Kelvin briefly this morning on the investment discussions. So, Kelvin, just extrapolating out, you've made reference to that sale of Anzac Lane and the monies that have come out of that being put into the appropriate place, assuming that will be as part of the investment portfolio. But the other thing I wanted to raise is pages 25 and 26, which is the dividends, 26 is the land sale, is just around the larger than expected potential dividends from Cord and Orion. And I think we should be looking, we've budgeted on a set amount to use for a subsidy of general rate. I think the difference should also be earmarked for going into that fund as well. We haven't formally moved that in any way, and I'm happy to do that at a future. I'll put a notice of motion if we need to, but at this stage I just would like it noted that is the intention I would have with that, and I think it's possibly shared by others. So just wanted to make those comments. Have you got any comments to make on that, Colin?
Only really on the Cord dividend. You'll remember that Cord provided a special dividend where their performance was higher than they anticipated in the year, and then they put that return as a special dividend, exactly for the reason that Murray stated there. Is sort of so it's not guaranteed every year that we'll get something like that, but it's a one-off type scenario.
I guess the point I'm making is that we've got a budgeted amount that a minimum budgeted amount. It's actually making a conscious decision as to what to do with what may or may not be over and above that. And I think that rather than just going into general rate, there needs to be a discussion and an outcome debated and agreed upon.
And that's a good point, and they'll come back through the strategy work we're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
Nicole?
So I know, Calvin, you probably won't know the answer to this, but it was just been on the radio this morning, yesterday, and it's come to mind again. We're talking about the building consent processing times, the whole thing with the chip board stuff going on at the moment, and it's just a question to staff if they can possibly follow up later whether that's actually had any influence on their timeframes with that. It's going on, trying to do replacement options and stuff like that with the way the consenting does.
I'll take that away to Tim and discuss, but I know that it's a challenge because brands only have really gibbers there in the specifications, so it becomes an issue around alternatives.
That's what MD spoke this morning and reckoned that, I mean, they have sent out a thing to councils about how to go about changing it, processing it as to not doing a proper change and a full change application and everything. So I'm just wondering how we are on our side with that.
If we take that down as an action, I'll get Tim to report back on that.
Shane? Murray?
Yeah. Look, sorry to have a second point, but that's raised a good point. Is the supplementary to that, Kelvin, I guess, is an understanding that if there's a change in specification, we live in a very litigious society, and we're last man standing. Where that leaves us legally, if it becomes 10 years down the track an issue with that product, do we get indemnity if government, central government, are going to make that edict or brands or whomever? We need to understand from a council risk perspective what that means for us. I'm sure you'll be all over that, but it's something that occurred to me with Nicole.
That's a good question, and I'll wrap that into Tim's question to come back on that.
Shane?
Good, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Calvin. Page 25, just around the resource. I was just had a question around what effect does increase in development have on refuse services, and how do we currently work with our waste collection services and collaborating with council when we plan for that type of growth? And I'm just thinking sort of, as we push forward with developments and houses and appropriate size of turning circles for some of these waste trucks to get around, as I've seen in other places, but also the capacity to pick it up and what sort of collaborative work we do there. The increase of consulting fees are up. Is it due to the consultants' fees are up, or is there an increase in consultation? I would agree also with Murray's sentiments around unbudgeted dividend, that being either whether we need to move something or not. I'd definitely second it, and unbudgeted dividend being allocated to the investment portfolio, and also the return from our investment properties. Can you give me clarification as to where that currently goes and where it should be, if it isn't already going into the investment portfolio? Thank you.
Okay, first on the waste one, might get Andrew to bring that back in terms of how that works in his waste report. Next question's around fees. The reason they're up is it's not necessarily, yes, some of the fees are increasing in value as you'd expect, but the main drivers of the fee increase is that we outsource a lot of the resource consent processing. Therefore, with the volumes up, the cost goes up, but on the other hand, we're recovering that through the fees we're charging. We're partially recovering that. Point around dividends, yes, noted, and the one around investment properties and returns. I think that's the point I was making was referred to Anzac Lane and iZone and some other properties. Where they've been recorded historically has been within those activity areas, which means we see some odd sort of looking outcomes for what you'd think is community service and facilities. We're looking to tidy that up, so we'll be making sure that all the relevant properties are going into the right spot, and that even goes to especially with Three Waters proposal coming up and assets which is strictly related to Three Waters. We're taking a close look on what those assets are and what they aren't. Yep.
Thank you. A couple of comments from me. Firstly, great report. Thank you. Very good. It's always an enjoyable read to every time. I know I've said this a few times, but every time you kind of walk through and look at a variance, and there's always seems to be a robust explanation below, so that's great. Secondly, it's just a comment around, I mentioned it this morning, the hui with Cord around, I was in a construction forum working group last week, I think, talking about, and so I'm not sure if the comments here or for major projects, but relevant nonetheless, with regards to how we contract and how we procure. So with the number of sub-trades that are going under at the moment with cost escalation and delays in supply chain, the comments were being made across the sector group, especially for Crown or even local government that have big balance sheets, that actually it's quite not reckless, but, is there a responsibility to be changing the way we procure and contract, because fixed fee contracts on some major players and contractors is actually going to make them fall over, or if they don't fall over, then the sub-trades will fall over. So the way we're going to contract have to, do we have to start being our responsibility for the whole sector and trying to get, value outcomes of good projects? Are we going to have to change the way we do it to be responsible and looking at that risk and who's best to own that risk of cost escalation and delays? So just a comment, but that was the kind of the conversation happening last week in the city around, again, it was around Crown, and a couple of companies that I work with big balance sheets going, actually, we don't want these companies falling over because we need them to deliver our projects. So just a comment around, I guess, the understanding of what's happening in the sector and the sub-trades, and that every week you're reading about more and more sub-trades going into liquidation and receivership. So.
Well, Murray left some comments just before he does. We're currently got a review of our procurement policy underway. It's quite a substantial review, bottom up to look at it. But in terms of fixed price contracts, we have very few of them, but I'll let Murray discuss.
Yeah, it's a very good point at the moment. that risk allocation between client and contractor is really important. And what we're seeing at the moment is the industry saying they cannot carry lump sum fixed price risk. So in our contracts, some of them have escalation built in, but we are being very amenable to discussions around that. A lot of our work, of course, is procured through court and through our relationship with them. So it makes it a wee bit easier to actually, and as good friends, to work through those issues and to avoid the type of litigation you might get if you're on a fixed price with a specific other contractor. So far, so good. And we had a meeting with CCNZ last week. So everybody would like more work being given out, but I think we're living in a significantly higher inflation mode than we've ever done for a long 20 years. So we just have to be sensible about that.
I just want to add one comment, because I know asphalt's been an issue on a couple of projects we're all managing, and we have to make sure that as the council might have a bigger balance sheet to absorb these things, which is understood why that might be a good idea. If the boot was on the other foot and pricing was dropping, we need to make sure contracts accept that as well, because there shouldn't be a chance for super profits to be made by contractors, prices move in a different direction. So we've just got to make sure we balance that argument out that everyone's got to take some pain and gain here. So it'll be an evolving issue.
Thanks.
Just with regards to Douglas's last comment about asphalt, is it going to be actually cheaper for some of our footpaths, instead of being done in asphalt, to be done in concrete? Is that maybe just leaning towards a cheaper option? Just wanted to ask, or some other method other than asphalt.
Can I just answer that? The age-old question about whether you go for concrete or asphalt, the same with roads, and have been around for a long time. Concrete is much more expensive but longer lasting. So it really depends on your discount rate and how long before you break even. So if you're looking at 50 to 60 years, then concrete is a better deal. But generally asphalt, for anything less than that, around the 20-year mark, asphalt is the better deal.
There's the issue of carbon footprint too, if we're going to be carrying that forward.
Yep. There's a couple of trends in this. One is that NZTA are looking to take over the supply of bitumen and asphalt in New Zealand. We don't know what the consequences of someone who doesn't know how to manage that activity starting to manage it. The other issue, and Douglas touched on that, in our roading maintenance contract beyond a year, there's a bitumen price escalation formula. So if bitumen goes up, we pay more. If it goes down, we automatically pay less. So that's been fixed for some time. It's a bit more difficult on a single project, which might be done over 9 to 12 months. We're seeing price escalation way beyond what we've seen in the past.
Thanks, Mary. If I have someone move Calvin's finance and performance report, please. Thank you, Deborah, and a seconder, Nicole. Thank you. All those in favour. Treasury.
If we move to page 35 in the book, the highlights of the dashboard, March quarter report. Borrowings were up, and they are slightly higher up than what they are now, and that's because we pre-funded 5 million of debt which was rolling off, and that has now since been repaid, and that of course had a bit of a flow-on effect into the cash and deposits because we're holding that additional 5 million. Year-end borrowing is likely to be 75.2 million. Seeing no need to be drawing down anything further before the end of the year, which is only a few days away, really. As I said, cash and deposits were up, and that was partly due to that additional cost there. And the cost of debt is starting to lift, which you would anticipate. I'll get into that a little bit more shortly. Investments really where they were just slightly up. Going to page 36, debt tenure is all well within policy guidelines. So
80.2 million there of debt. Moving forward to the next page around interest rate risk, and this is the interesting space that we're moving into. Their fixed term exposure covered there of 46.4, slightly lower than where it probably needs to be, but we do have a lot of, which is not included in that number, a lot of forward dated swaps coming forward that'll cover debt which appears at that time. So no concern there really on that, and the post cost of hedging is starting to move up as we bring in some of these new swaps. Pre-cost still pretty low. We have shifted the tenure of the fixed debt out a little bit longer, which is also good given the current environment. Cash investments, won't dwell on this, but it's fairly much unchanged from where we were. Debtors in really good health, given the circumstances of the current economy and challenges. You see there that comparing back to this time last year, the rates arrears are significantly lower than where they were. They're around not quite half of that, but they're pretty close to it. Still some higher debt balances in the environmental services space there, and that generally relates around resourcing consent and on occasion development contributions. And the safeguard that we've got there is we won't issue those consents until we've got cash in the bank. And quite often they can be invoiced, and for various reasons there may be a delay in a consent being issued or something happening, which therefore means the debt's sitting on the books slightly longer. Slightly higher, but not of concern. Just dwelling back on the rates there, the percentage outstanding still lower than where it's been in prior years at 2.7%. General market, interest rate curves are shifting up, and what we're also seeing is the margin starting to extend. This is not just a New Zealand issue, it's a global issue that's occurring, and we're being dragged along at the moment by the US, not the US, so the Australian market, where they tightened their cash rate a little bit more than what was expected, so that sort of dragged us up a little bit more. The advisors and economists around are still seeing this to flatten off in the future. They're not expecting it to continually rise, but to get to a point where it will lock itself down. CPI on page 41, you can see the incredible lift we've seen there. A long period of very low inflation rates, and to suddenly have a lift like this is quite abnormal. What else do you want to see there? You can see the lag with wage inflation, but I suspect we're going to see some fairly large increases in wages coming through just to sort of catch up with that. I'm happy to take questions on Treasury.
Thank you, Murray.
Yeah, thanks, Calvin. I guess the perennial question, is there anything that's keeping you awake at night about this, which it looks as though you're sleeping well, so I suggest it possibly isn't. But I'm just sorry, I haven't got our work calendar in front of us, but we will have to review our Treasury and financing policy. I just wonder whether it's, in the past we've had presentations, I think, PricewaterhouseCoopers. David, yes, whether that's something you would see value in. I personally thought there was limited value when we did, but just for, obviously we're in a dynamic and changing environment, as you've just talked about. So whether we need to be a wee bit more adaptive might be something that comes via yourself, or perhaps supported by an independent. But just, those two questions really.
We use PwC for advisory. I'm just looking at my calendar here because I got a meeting with Alex from PwC tomorrow. I find them really informative. They just to hear what's going on around the market. While it may have been of limited value for this group, I still suggest that having Alex come in for a half-hour briefing just on where the market's at, given it is so dynamic at the moment, would be useful for probably the next audit and risk meeting. So I can organise that. position where we're at, look completely comfortable at the moment. Yes, interest rates are rising, but they're only going back to where they have been prior. They're not, and we're in a fortunate position where we had incredibly low interest rates for a long period of time, which suddenly become the norm, where it's not the norm really in a long running economy. So I think we're sort of getting back to where the norm is now.
I guess as a clarification, Calvin, I possibly a wee bit unfair in my dismissal of people you see, but what I felt came back from that the last time was you could do this or you could do that. There wasn't actually any real equivocal advice on this is what you should do. And I guess that's a position that they'll find themselves in, and I understand that. But from that perspective, it wasn't particularly helpful from a governance perspective. You know, I mean, we all know what you could have done. You know, that's, yeah. But an analysis of saying, perhaps a more in-depth analysis of why you could do this and why you could do this and the consequences, I guess a bit of pros and cons might have been useful. I didn't really feel we got that out of it. You may be getting it at a management level, and I'm sure you are. The conversation with us was on a different, you know, on a governance frame, and I'm not sure that it quite delivered what I expected out of it. Is the takeaway from that?
Yeah, look, you will get that from consulting firms. To, yeah, it's hard to pin them down at times with a yes, no. But my suggestion on this one would be that we bring the Treasury policy to the next Audit and Risk Committee with a view of that policy from PwC is probably the best thing from a governance point of view, just to give confidence that the policy is meeting our needs, and especially with the changing market, but holding firm and not sort of knee-jerk reactions to sort of changing the markets is generally where these guys, they don't want to see you jumping from left to right type thing.
Shane?
Kia ora, Calvin. Thank you very much for the report. The report does indicate a high level of comfort in Treasury position of Council. Maybe a little bit in the same vein of Murray's question around what does keep you up at night, and so noticing on page 41 the explosive growth in CPI. Do you envisage that being of any risk to Council, perhaps in the rates receivable area?
Oh, it certainly is a risk that we're facing, and through the budget, the annual plan deliberations and considerations and workshops, you saw those numbers coming through that we're seeing, and as Murray just stated before, that we're seeing unprecedented price increases flowing through, which we're being forced in some way to absorb those on behalf of the ratepayer. We've moved rates we're proposing to move rates to the extent of our policy limits, which is still modest compared with a lot of other councils at 6%, where it's a modest lift. So yeah, that cost pressures most definitely. Probably the other piece within that is the labour market. That is the one thing that is really of concern around, and getting good people is challenging. And if we were talking about resourcing consents before, getting good people in that market is really, really challenging. So we're looking at avenues to bring immigrants, individuals from South Africa and other places forward, but we're looking what we can do with Ministry of Immigration on that.
Thanks, Shane. A couple of things from me again. Thank you very much for the report. Another report I always enjoy reading. I feel like I learn something every time I read it, because I'm definitely no Treasury expert. That is such that I was reading I was going, because I do look at the detail, and I was like, how debt borrowing has changed, but yet the undrawn facilities are unchanged, but then and in the headroom, but then I realised that one's obviously the local government, the other one is the Westpac. So on the Westpac, is it still worth, I guess, given your review of this, of when it's maturing in August, is that, it sounds like there's still work to be done, but is it still worth holding that with the committed 0.35, you know, for just the luxury of being able to have that on hand? We'll need to hold a certain amount of undrawn facilities that's effectively liquid
assets for us, so we can draw down those on short notice should there be some sort of event that occurs. It's part of what we would have to do. What we are investigating is whether the Westpac standby facility is appropriate or whether we should move to our GFA facility. There's not a lot of difference in pricing, but it is also good to have a little bit of a spread of where your debt sits and where your facilities sit.
Yeah, I was just looking at the cost of having the luxury of, whether it would be better to, I guess you'll work the numbers.
You'll wind up having to hold higher cash balances if you don't have that there, and that's cheaper than holding cash.
Yeah. The other thing, and again, it's a great report. I do find the trend analysis really useful, but I was just wondering, is it relevant to have the same period, the same quarter in the previous year? Like, is it? I know we're not a seasonal type organisation, but given we have, long-term plan, annual plan, and our balance date, would it be useful information for us to see where that RO was this time last year? If you don't think it would be useful, I don't want to create more work for the report.
I don't. If you think about borrowings, it's really relating to where you've come from as opposed to where you were a year ago. If we were a seasonal business where you had to take borrowings to cover seasonal income, then yes, it would be relevant, but we're not in that position. Cost of debt, the interesting thing on that would be a longer term trend and a trend graph on that, which could be provided. But yeah, it's more that continual trend on this stuff rather than comparison with last year.
Yeah, no, thank you. And the last thing, just following on from Murray's comment, I have great faith, I guess, trust and confidence in the Treasury policy, the creation of it, your review of it, and the quality of this report. So I'm not too sure how much value I'd get from PwC telling me that the Treasury policy is all good. But where I do think there would be value, and it might not be now, it might be something to think about later, is around that strategic forward focus, looking on our entire investment strategy. So not a Treasury policy, but what is our investment strategy? Where are we heading from now to the next 5 years? Are we getting best bang for buck based on our risk appetite of being, a ratepayer, while looking after the ratepayer? So, we've got a mix of, we've got shareholdings, we've got investment properties, we've got money in the bank, we've got debt. But looking in the next 5 years, are we, from an investment strategy perspective, are we doing the right thing with what we're planning? So I'll get real value out of that as opposed to someone telling me that the Treasury policy is all good, because I think the Treasury policy probably is pretty good. But again, we'll take your guidance on that. Yeah,
it's good practice to have a third party review of that Treasury policy, probably not every time you do it, but it's worth having. It just provides that assurance coming through. In terms of investments strategy, that work's underway and progressing. So Murray referred to some of that this morning, so we've got a small subgroup of the council involved in that.
Right.
But then I'll come back to possibly this group or the larger council.
Murray, do you have another question?
Yeah, just maybe just a bit of a statement, I guess, from my perspective, and Lisa on the Treasury policy and that advice. From my opinion, look, I realise I'm going to be yesterday's man very shortly, so it'll be revised for the new incoming council, and they will look at it as well. But I think the importance of that is understanding the why. So it comes back from a governance perspective. I think that's quite useful to us, because if we have a vision of going in a certain direction, then that revenue and financing policy is quite crucial, I think, to council as to why we're doing that. So, and it will, to some degree, structure the way that we want that to be. So I think that's actually quite crucial to the operation of council, is my perspective, if that's at all useful.
Yes, noticed. Yeah, agreed.
Thanks, Murray. Any other comments, questions? Someone move the Treasury report, please. Thank you, Shane. Seconder. Thank you, Murray. All in favour? Oh, yes. Yeah, make sure it keeps. Major projects.
Projects Craig is isolated home. So he's well, but his partner is not. We'll move to page 45. I've got the Odyssey Town Centre summary of the various projects within the program. As we previously discussed and been discussed around is a forecast overspend of 5.35 million at the moment, but there is some work still going on around the town square, which we'll touch on shortly. Moving forward, Tiara is complete. There's a slight, small provision of hardly anything, about 30,000, just for any odds and sods that may come through as last minute invoices. This will come off the report in the near future and will go on our register for upcoming post-implementation reviews. Rossman Reserve developments in the youth park. Great progress being made with all you skaters out there with the skate bowl and park. Running slightly ahead of budget year to date, but there's there's no concerns over the overall total forecast. We've seen good progress on the constructions of buildings A and D, and the design stage for others. We can see sort of a little bit of groundwork occurring for some of the buildings there. Regarding the forecast costs, the work still be done. We'll come back to the council regarding the covered structure, so the armor structure. There's a couple of items there which may be some scope changes along the way. Infrastructure in town centre, road and car parks. It's forecast to come in within the anticipated tenders. We've seen lots of work around there recently. It's been going really well. Moving on to Foster Park, the overall budget there of up to 76 million. It's about a $500,000 variance on there over a considerable long project. So that's
not bad.
Been good work. That's some really good outcomes on there. Aquatic centre extension is still sitting there, but this will come out and it will go on the PIR list as well. The variance there are changed from previous periods. Remember, we picked up a lot of unexpected maintenance. So maintenance for the future maintenance will come back. The Foster Park turfs are operational. Hockey and football players enjoying them. A really outstanding asset and delivered very close to budget. There's a couple of health and safety issues around some lighting that we'll discuss later on. Criminal Reserve extension progressing well. Recently saw some good aerial photographs of that, and you can really see that reserve coming together nicely. And there's papers from the board to the council on the 22nd to discuss the next stage of that. Budget pressures on that one. That is coming due to inflationary pressures on that. It's been discussed in the course of May at the next stage. Whilst the driving section upgrade completed, that will come out of the reports in the future. Points progressing plan. Trunk sewer, this was on the site visit recently, and there was a good discussion within that around the cost pressures that they've faced. some of the challenges that we're facing along the way. But overall, a good result in terms of the construction that we're operating. We spent the required DIA funding within the specified timeframe, so that was an excellent job, and responses back from DIA is that we have been performed exceptionally well on that job, where there's other councils who are having challenges around spending. Water infrastructure to really prepare. Likewise, the wastewater upgrade, criminal reserve reservoir. This has been ongoing for some time here, and we're well aware of the budget overall on this. Government has changed the period. And I will take questions.
Thank you, Calvin. Murray.
But you've probably answered the ones I've got highlighted, Kelvin, but I'll just run through them. Page 49 is that increased contingency from 10 to 155%, which, although, you know, when you look at the, well, I wouldn't say that figure's insignificant, but it's a major increase in contingency. That's really just, I'm assuming, putting words in your mouth, cost increases that are going to come out of inflationary perspective. The other one's 54, so I'll scroll through, it's going to take a wee while. Which is proven in reserve extension, potential for cost increases, the risks have not been quantified. I assume from that they'll be quantified when we go out to that tender process. We'll have a better idea for that next stage. Is that correct?
Yeah, the paper coming forward will talk to the cost pressures that are occurring and how that's operating, and discussion around the funding of that, noting that high DCs on this project.
You've just talked about Brilliant Reservoir, page 60, and the construction costs, the LTD of 0.9 million now forecast to be 1.45. I just, apologies if I don't remember that being discussed, but what are the difficulties there that we are facing? Again, is it just pricing, the cost of supplied materials? Sorry, page 60 and up on your financials and construction. Your tender is 0.94, but the forecast is 188, so a variance of 1.45. I don't recall discussing that before, and apologies if we have.
Murray, you might want to cover that one off.
I think it might be better rather than doing off the cuff.
Yeah,
we'll come back at the next meeting with more detail.
Absolutely, Murray. Apologies, I should have sent something through before. So, thank you.
Yep.
Yep. Just a question, Foster Park, have we got any allowance for any money for the Foster House? Is there anything allowed in any budget anywhere? The second one was the aquatic centre. We've done all this maintenance. Are those figures we've got the end of the maintenance? There's no extra maintenance that you can see in the future. And the other one, I'm having quite a lot of people ring me up about the wastewater in Darfield. They're really concerned that they're building at the moment and wanting to move into houses, and there is no wastewater pipe at the moment. And so they're being possibly told they have to put a septic tank in, which might only be for a few months. So I think it's something we should discuss at some stage, because I think it is a risk to us.
We have a budget of 260,000 for memorial or garden work in that area. It will depend on which option council ultimately decides over the coming months, but there's a budget for what we've got planned to staff level. Second one, the maintenance. We've completed all the maintenance work under the contract we did for the extension, but like with all facilities, there is ongoing renewal work in different parts of that building every year. So this is an ongoing program now.
In respect to the Darfield pipeline, we've been very careful not to make too many promises to developers exactly when that will be available. We're looking at around about October when the pump station is complete. In the interim, there'll be a few houses that may be ready to go. Before that, we'll be probably looking at some pumping options and cartage options rather than forcing people to do a septic tank for a couple of months. I think that would be unreasonable. But everybody's gone into this with no guarantees of exact date. I mean, obviously, cost pressures and supply difficulties do make an absolute date challenging. But we'll work with developers and individual householders as best we can.
Okay, thank you.
Cole.
To Rolleston Town Square, so page 49, so third point down on the financial commentary, I might have missed this, but it says the allowance for contingency has been increased from 10% to, I assume that's 15% as opposed to 155, whatever units it. It is 155.
Read the above figures, 0.13.
Where?
0.43. 0.43.
Okay, that's all right. I've missed.
Sorry, variance is 0.43.
No, that's all right. I missed that. That's why I was raising the questions. Thank you. Next one, the Foster Park, the turfs. So this has been a good project, and from my perspective, I'm biased on this, with, as I have family members both who are football players and hockey players, but taking last night, going and having a look round, those turfs were fully used. The half turfs for the hockey had 2 teams on them, and the full turf had about 3 or 4 teams training at the same time, plus football had people on the turf as well as it, along with the other fields that were lit. So this was after 5, so it was starting to get dark. So it is an asset to our community, and it is being used, well used already. One thing I wanted to mention as well about the lights. Obviously, I've been getting correspondence through the hockey club updating about the lights as well. Obviously, I knew from the council side, but I assume they don't mind me sharing this, but an email that came out about the lights to start with said, as part of that, provide as quickly as possible. So credit to the staff. Well, to get this sorted, that the club knew what was going on and everything like that. So thank you for that. The other thing that I had was about the Rolleston Drive section upgrade. News that they're waiting on the new street lights. It looks like those are going in at the moment now. I just drove past this morning. They're definitely getting changed now. So thank you for that. So it looks like that project hopefully will be finished very soon, completely finished.
I mean, should we take? Yeah, thanks, Calvin. Just confirming, we got most of the offending luminaires out last Wednesday, which therefore allowed us to open the hockey field in particular back up to night training. There are some luminaires on a couple of grass fields which were a bit beyond the reach of the what do you call it, crane or whatever we were using to get up into. So we're now with a slightly lower quality of lighting for the turf, but it's everyone's comfortable with that. So we just now wait for the parts to arrive from the States. Madam Chair, may not probably been copied on, but there was found to be a flaw in the luminaire which sits on front of the light, and so they've got a 10-year warranty, so they're all being replaced. Including the work we've had to do the last 2 weeks of urgency, but it's really great to get that feedback, because I had 2 or 3 staff members working at night with clubs on site to get that problem solved. So yeah, that's well, I think one of them even got a shout out on the mayor from memory, so much appreciated.
Deborah.
Thank you. Look, can we go to the last page of your report, page 60? to do with the Prebbleton Reservoir and the W Waste Treatment Plant. I note that the funding from this is 100% development contribution. And I also see a variance in the budget of 1.62 million. And also the alarming issues with regards to the risks, all trending upwards. Just for clarification, we've got these escalating costs and issues, and we collect the development contribution. Are we actually collecting enough development contribution in time and space to actually cover our own costs and our own risks with regards to putting in this infrastructure?
Yes, we are, and it's just the way the modelling works on this. That will be one, we've increased the development contribution rate by 8.6% this year for PPI. Doesn't cover all of that, but when we flow through to the next reset of the development contributions, the balances of the accounts get updated, and therefore it's moving forward into the collection of the development contributions. And given this is being built in front of the growth, we're capturing growth at the later stages of it.
So just with regards to the requirement to alter development contributions, do we need to do that annually, and does it involve some consultation through the annual budget, annual plan process, or have we actually written our development contribution policy to allow for that flexibility to be monitored every 3 years?
The policy allows the rates to be increased by PPI every year, and that's an automatic thing which occurs and doesn't require consultation. To go and adjust the projects on the list and rates materially on the list of projects would require consultation and potentially because of its connection and being a significant policy, a revision to the LTP, but it would be a revision in that policy only.
Other questions? Right, if someone move the major projects report, please. Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, second there. Thank you, Nicole. All those in favour? Aye. Yeah, statement of intent.
I think this is a machinery piece. So we're receiving the statements of intents from CORD, Central Plains Water Trust, Selwyn District Charitable Trust, and the Local Government Funding Agency. There's one further statement of intent to follow, and that will be the Orion. It is not in the final stage and hasn't gone through their board yet for approval, so we'll receive that in due course, but I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, I'll have just one comment, and it is just the way it is, but they are all of varying quality, aren't they? Yes. And I guess that's something we have to live with, but maybe something we can be mindful of in the next few years, where we can try and, I know it's difficult when, you know, some of them are JV or some of them are not being produced just for us. But yeah, that's my only comment, is that they are of varying quality. So. But happy to take.
Shane, second.
Oh,
Shane,
yeah.
seconded, yes.
Move it. Shane, second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Someone to move us into PX, please. Thank you, Deborah.
Bobby.
Oh, and second there, Bob. Thank you. All those in favour? Aye.
I could go on and break it, so 4:30.
Yeah, and we're now. Oh.
I reckon we ease our way to 12:30. We have a 1 hour, 30-minute break. And because we've got call coming at 10 o'clock. To deal with those other issues. 10 minutes, councillor Reid. Do you want to?
So we're sitting here for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
No, we'll get through.
We'll
crack on.
We're doing stuff.
Yeah, we'll crack on and just at least get through the, because we have got quite a bit in
We've
the.
got cord